I knew from the age of 10, I wanted to be a physical therapist.
You need to practice being in chaos.
So keeping in mind that behavioral health issues is huge in police and fire, and it's getting worse right now. The more you train, the more likely you are to get injured.
Like I said, we're going to be talking about combat athletes as well as first responders, and those things kind of go hand in hand. But
Sure.
I want to first highlight, when did your curiosity begin with helping first responders, building a whole business and brand around helping, policemen, firefighters, and so on?
Yeah. So for clarification, I work for Rebound, which is a national company. It was actually started by a friend of mine. His name is Luis Rivera. He's at PTATC. And Luis and I, he was actually a student of mine 20 some odd years ago. And we've both worked in sports medicine. He's worked in professional baseball, et cetera. And as he was working in a clinic, he was seeing that there was a big difference between the road that a professional athlete would go and the road that a first responder would go. An athlete's injured, they're in a doctor in 24 to 48 hours. They're getting their MRIs right away. They're getting their surgery right away. They're getting into PT right away, right? And the level of care that they're getting is at a very high level. And so he was seeing this big gap between that and what first responders got. For example, a first responder may not actually get to an orthopedic surgeon for 2 or 3 months down the road. So the time to what we call definitive diagnosis could sometimes be 3 months. And so simply by setting up, he was in Milwaukee, by setting up a network of, docs that he dealt with, PTs that he had dealt with, and a cell phone and a computer and sitting in Starbucks, he basically started building this network for first responders in his local area. It really took off. He ended up getting a grant to go, an innovation grant to go around the country and interview departments to see if this is a common problem or is it just in Milwaukee. Found out that it was a national problem. And secondly, would they pay for someone to solve that problem? And they would. And so he started Rebound. I want to say it was like 5 or 6 years ago. He approached me. Initially, when he approached me, it's because of the work I was doing with the EMI. He approached me, about the application of that technology to first responders. And ironically, we had just started doing some stuff with military personnel. And when he approached me, I originally thought it was kind of like just to integrate the technology with what he was doing. And it turned out that he really wanted to start this new division called Vitality, and asked me if I would head it up. And this was right at the onset of the pandemic. It was also the onset of Black Lives That Matter. And I was seeing, how our first responders were going through this, the tragedies that they were being placed in and situations they were being placed in. And, sometimes, I'm a firm believer God opens a door for you. And I've always led myself by the path that God puts me on. And I really felt like he was putting me in a direction for a reason. And I had, I worked for a Fortune 500 company, 1,800 facilities. I had a national role. And, I took a risk and a jump right at the height of a pandemic to do this. And it's been an amazing experience. There is nothing I enjoy more. I've done this at the professional level, college level. It is so enjoyable to do this with first responders. One, because they're running in when everybody else runs out. And two is they are truly our national heroes and they deserve it. And they are so humble and so appreciative every time we go in and do these assessments and we set them up. It just makes it so rewarding for everything that we do. And I love it because nobody's doing what we're doing in this space. Nobody. And there's a lot of different companies out there saying they're doing something that's similar to it. But what we're doing with the technology, in the ways that we're capturing the data, mass data sets, right now, we've only been doing this, a year and a half collecting data. We have data on like 3,000 first responders. We already have the largest data set on first responders. My goal by the end of next year is to have a data set of over 10,000 first responders. And I'm sure we'll easily get that.
Yeah.
That will be the largest data set ever created for first responders. But then what it allows you to do is to really see, where do you need to make programming? Like, what kinds of things do you need to address? Part of my goal is, can we use that data to develop better shoes, better boots for first responders, to help reduce musculoskeletal injuries, better steps on fire trucks. I think there's just, beyond just, creating exercise programs, I think there's so much that from what I've learned in sports with the mass data sets that we've collected, I think we have only tapped the surface of what we can do. And the beauty of it is that these men and women so deserve it, and it's just, it just, quite honestly, it's kind of funny because I always get kind of teary-eyed because it really just, these men and women deserve it, and the services that we're doing are just, it's awesome. It's really, I mean, it's been the most rewarding thing to do in 25 years of practice.
That's amazing. And the value of that data is huge. I was just thinking that the ability for you to grab data for those divisions and is extremely difficult because there's no one out on the battlefield or anyone out and like running with cops or running with firefighters or running with anybody for that matter to try and collect data. And for you guys to grab something so unique and profound and has such an impact, it's got to be so rewarding for you as a clinician.
Yeah.
And is this something that you've always searched for in regards to just as becoming a better clinician, as finding purpose as a physical therapist? I know burnout is something that's always on top of mind for a lot of physical therapists. Is this something that's kind of allowed you to steer away from that idea? I don't know how you feel about burnout, but I know sometimes people have a hard time figuring out where they're finding their niche. So do you feel like this has like prevented you from being able to feel like you're burnt out?
I got into being a physical therapist because, my father's quadriplegic, broke his neck when I was 10 years old. And from that point on, I knew I wanted to be a physical therapist. When I sat for my interviews, I sat for all my interviews. That's what I said. I knew from the age of 10, I wanted to be a physical therapist. I felt like God directed me that direction. When I started to develop the EMI, I felt like I was being called to do that because, and again, it's, I don't know how else to explain it, but I just felt like this desire and this calling to try to do something about ACLs. And that's what developed the EMI. And so this to me was just another part of the path of, reaching that calling. I feel like if you fulfill your calling and you fulfill your passion, you're never going to be burnt out. And I'll tell you, I love what I do. I've been doing this for 25 years and I still get up at 3:00 in the morning every single day. And I work until 6:00 at night and I love what I do. So to me, it's about serving your calling and serving your passion, and then burnout will never happen.
Yeah. Well, much like you serving your calling, much of the guys who are consider themselves first responders, they're doing their calling. Right. And so for your ability to strive for your calling and then, match that with them, I'm sure a lot of the athletes or, first responders can relate to you on a very easy level. Sure. Now, getting back to just first responders in general, I know you mentioned something really early on where it can sometimes take up to 3 months for a first responder to see an orthopedic surgeon. Why is that? Or is there just a bunch of people who are like, is it the medical system or is it just a bunch of
it's a medical system?
Medical system. Okay.
It's the workers' comp system, because the traditional route is, they get injured, they'll either go to an ER or they'll go to an OCMED provider. They'll look at it, and typically, nothing against OCMED doctors, but they're not orthopedic surgeons and they're not sports medicine specialists. So it's maybe a strain sprain, we're going to try some anti-inflammatory. Let's take some days off. Let's monitor it, see how it goes. They go that conservative route, thinking that by going that conservative route, you're saving dollars on the front end. The problem is that the episodic care becomes so prolonged that the long-term outcome is that you're actually spending more medical dollars in the long run. So our goal is that if you've got a rotator cuff tear, we want to identify that in 72 hours, and we want to get you into surgery in 24 to 48 hours after getting that. And so what it does is, what we found is that with our approach is the medical dollars on the front end are a little bit more, but on the back end, significantly less, because the episodic care is less, there are less time off. We all know as physical therapists, like, right? If you address that rotator cuff problem at week 1 versus week 10, you're going to be so much better off. And so that's what we do, is we address it right up front. We get it going. And the other piece of that is, they can't send a fire truck to your house with 4 guys or 2 guys because 2 guys are out. They have to fill it with 2 more people. So the other cost savings is the overtime cost to fill those spots when those guys are out. So when you add that cost and the healthcare cost, I mean, the savings is huge.
Well, and that saves people money too, ironically
Yeah.
enough, because who pays for the fire department? Who pays for the police stations? It's the American people, right? And so
Right.
if we're able to, get our service workers back sooner and save
Well,
money in the long run, we're not only helping, our, the first responders, but we're also helping just healthcare in general.
right.
So that way people can get back and we don't have to deal with a staffing issue, I don't know if you've seen that with policing over the past couple of years. My brother's a trooper and he has described that there can be sometimes staffing issues with police departments and fire departments.
In now, with the political environment that there is, we've dealt with some departments that are down 400 officers. And so when a guy goes down, you're already in the hole. So with the defund police and all that, what's ended up happening is it's made what we do even that much more necessary, because you can't be down. Because now firefighters are working overtime like 3 or 4 times a month, for 24-hour shifts, which completely wears them out and makes them more susceptible to more musculoskeletal injuries. So it's just this vicious cycle. So for us, ironically, we've actually been growing faster and busier because so many departments are understaffed. They are trying to hire more people, but they're also trying to keep their people healthy. When they're there, they're trying to keep them healthy because they know that if that person goes out, they're already at a deficit. You know what I mean?
Well, how do you start if, say, you have somebody comes in and they are working 3 to 4 times overtime? How do you approach that as a physical therapist? Be like, you need to take some time off, or maybe you need to, take time away from your job. It's got to be a difficult conversation to have with somebody who's got to put food on the table for their family, as well as, they don't want to let their squad down or they don't want to show any weakness. So how do you approach that conversation when you have somebody who's doing that?
Yeah, so we don't actually provide the physical therapy. We don't actually provide the physician services. We call ourselves a first responder healthcare navigators. So we help to navigate the healthcare process. We contract with physical therapy providers and physicians. On my side, with the vitality side, my approach is that I'm not going to have a conversation about overtime, because quite honestly, most of the departments that we work with nowadays are understaffed, and they are working overtime. My goal is to help them understand the correlation of eating better and how that's going to help them reduce their risk for musculoskeletal injury, hydrating properly and how that's going to help, sleep, and the effect of lack of sleep on depression at cortisol levels, and how that's going to add to depression, how that's going to add to behavioral health issues, how that's going to add to decreased energy, how that's going to add to decrease or increase susceptibility to musculoskeletal injuries. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help to leverage all the things that we know from science and nutrition and all of that to help them be safer and better, so that they can correlate that to, I am having to work overtime, so I do have to be better on my nutrition. I do have to be better on my sleep. I do have to be better on my hydration. So it makes a little bit more sense to them of why they have to do this stuff.
And it's easier said than done, especially when you're working long hours and maybe you're sitting at the fire station for,
Yep.
so many hours, but it's something that you need to try and place priority on if you want to
Yep.
try and perform, at your best. But
Right.
you've collected all this data. Has there been any like large conclusions that you've seen that kind of surprised you at having collected so many different data sets, or is this something that's still in the works and you guys are
It's
trying
still
to?
in the works. Yeah. I'd be making some assumptions right now. But it's still in the works. The good thing is that what I am seeing is that we're seeing a lot of guys who come back from an injury, especially lower kinetic chain injury, where they come in and I do an assessment on, they've been back to work for a couple months or whatever, and they fall into our mass physicals, and I do an assessment on them, and I see huge biomechanical flaws,
Mm.
like, just like our ACLs, right? When they're back to play, they're back to play, and their back to play is different than football back to play because their life depends on it, right? Not only does their life depend on it, but other people's lives depend on it. So, it allows me to identify those folks earlier,
Mhm.
and create true meaningful change to them in programming, and then get, the beauty of it is that once they've come off an injury, and I'm able to identify that and I relate that back to their injury, they're like, oh man, this makes sense. Definitely doing this. Then the compliance with it is even that much higher.
Got it. Well, I kind of want to go back to a question I asked before. For physical therapists who do work with first responders and people who are maybe even military, what would you say to them to try and convince them to start changing their habits? Or have you found, over the 20 years of being a physical therapist, things that you've allowed or have found that will allow buy-in for your patients? Because even for me, we're going to get into combat athletes here soon, but
Yeah.
I know sometimes trying to get patients to stick to their home exercise program outside of
Right.
just being
Right.
having a difficult job can be difficult. So would you have any advice for providers who may be working with first responders that are having a difficult time and having them stick to an exercise program or change their diet or change the way that they look at recovery?
So a couple of things. Number one is I try to relate it to, meaningful things for them, pain that they're having, or functionally what they're doing, especially as you mature, you're slowing down. Like, how can we create programming that's going to help you not only remain healthier, but also help to improve your overall performance? A sad fact is that when first responders retire, most of them live about 7 to 8 years before they pass away.
Mm.
And so there is a health consequence at retirement. So part of my messaging, when I'm talking to departments, is the longevity of your retirement, so that you can squat down and pick your grandchild off the ground, so you can play football in the yard with your grandkids, so you can go hiking up in the mountains after you retire. Like, it's not just about your job, but it's about your life when you're done with your job. Like, how do you do that? But then also relating it back to, I tend to relate a lot of that stuff back to behavioral health. The average person in their lifetime will see typically between 2 and 3 tragic incidents. The average firefighter and police officer between 400 and 600. And so, there's tragic events, right? So, keeping in mind that behavioral health issues is huge in police and fire, and it's getting worse right now, because of departments being understaffed, they're overworking, all this stuff, right? So relating, how nutrition feeds in, because nutrition does feed into that. Exercise does feed into that. Sleep does feed into that, and how all of that can have a positive influence on overall behavioral health, to help them withstand that stuff, because they're going to be exposed to it. It's an unfortunate part of their jobs. And how can we better prepare them physically and mentally for the challenges of what they're doing? It's no longer, it used to be like back in the 60s and 70s, you get a firefighter who'd be standing on top of a building that's burning with no SCBA on, no breathing apparatus. They're just sitting there breathing all that stuff. It's not old school anymore. Like,
Mm.
we can take the science of what we know, and that's why athletes are better today at retirement than they were 20 years ago. and applying that same thing, that same methods to our first responders so that they're better at retirement than they were 10 or 15 years ago.
And I find it fascinating that any one of those factors can contribute to the others, right? Like you seeing a traumatic event can lead to decreases in sleep, and then poor nutrition, or your poor nutrition could lead to decreases in sleep and poor, and all eventually, all this leads to poor performance. And optimally, we'd all like to think that each first responder is bringing their best to the table every time they come into work, like anything else, right? And so it's important to consider these factors, especially as a clinician, but also as somebody who, if you are a first responder, those are the things that you really need to be thinking about, and finding a clinician who's willing to work with you, so that way you can actually try to get on the right track and make sure you're bringing your best to work every day, because it's certainly not always the case. I know that food habits at the very least are not always the best.
Well, and another, another thing that I always try to do, and this is not a part of my job, but one of the things I always try to do, especially if I'm working with police departments, is because I train wherever I go, I take my gi with me wherever I go. And what I typically will try to do is bring people from the department and introduce them to a local gym and get them involved in JiuJitsu. Because, that's the other thing is that, a couple of things that go along with that. One is just the stress relief. There's We Defy, which is an organization that uses for military. And what they found is that when you do jiu-jitsu, it reduces a lot of the problems associated with PTSD. So there's that piece of it. There's the exercise piece of it, the cardiovascular piece of it, the stress reduction piece of it. And, especially for our police officers, what we find is that they are less likely to resort to pulling a weapon if they have an increased confidence that this person in front of me, I've got 10 things I can do to this person before I have to pull my weapon. So there's a level of confidence that comes along with that training as well. So one of the things I also try to do as a part of my role, and I talk to departments about this all the time, is getting them involved in that. And typically what I do is I talk to the gym, because a lot of gyms will actually offer discounts for first responders. And so I try to, because we all know, those of us that are in the sport, we know that if you do this, matter of fact, our particular gym, in our morning class, about half of our class are police officers, because we know that if you train, you're going to be so much less likely to pull a weapon, and the mental aspects that go along with it.
Well, feeling prepared on the job is crucial, right? And being able to be self-aware during chaos, I feel, is the most difficult challenge of being a cop or any first responder. And I don't think, to your point, you need to practice that. You need to be in chaos. You need to practice being in chaos in order for you to understand how your body is going to react and what tools you have at your disposal. And I think that's where we see a lot of issues or problems with first responders sometimes, is that some of these people haven't been trained enough in chaos in order for them to respond accordingly. And I think that's a great thing for, I've seen with police officers as well, is that they're, trying to get more involved with being a combat athlete and being in the martial arts community. And I think that's where a lot of, you can build it, like you said, to your point, building a community of people who are of like-minded individuals and can share and relate certain issues. So that way, people are more confident with their skill set. And this all, includes, just trying to get involved with your community and so on. And I think it's going to be the future of first responders is going to have to be them being used to this controlled chaos.
Absolutely. And two, that the controlled chaos it's so true, because, when you're doing martial, I cannot tell you how many police officers I've had that come in, and I'm not a small guy, but I'm 5'8", 5'7", somewhere around there, 205 pounds, and I've had some police officers come in that are 6'2", 280, and they are shocked that a dude that's my height can manhandle them around. But that's a part of being in a part of the martial art, is you don't freak out. like you freak out when you for a first number of years, you freak out all the time. But once you become experienced and you get the training behind you, it's so much more controlled, and you only get that if you're doing it on a regular basis, and there's just so much more confidence. And it's cool because, a lot of the guys, I was just training with a Williamson County Sheriff's officer this morning. And I love training with these guys because, one, I have such respect for what they do. And it gives me so much personal pride when I see that stuff that I've taught them or conveyed to them, that I see them doing, and they're getting so much better. I'm like, man, you could take anybody on the street. Like where you're at right now, you could take anybody on the street.
Right.
Like that is so cool because I know that they're going to be safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And not like, well, let's also remind everybody that you're a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a while. And that's not to say this is like an ego thing where people are out there like, oh, I could beat anybody up.
Right.
It's more
No.
of just, it's more of to get you prepared for the situation when you do have somebody who's out of control. And, my brother's similar stature, maybe a little bit taller, a little bit bigger. And when he used to work local PD, he would describe to me that some of these guys who are on drugs and other things, they have like superhuman strength.
Right.
And sometimes, even though you have the best skills possible, you still can't even take these guys down. And it requires two people. And so if you're able to at least bring in this skill set that you're able to control some kind of chaos, at least you'll put yourself in a better position not to get injured.
Absolutely. And injury. You're much less likely to get injured.
Yeah.
And two, there's much less likely to actually pull a weapon. So it's and again, it's not about beating somebody up. It's about the ability to be able to control chaos. So.
Yeah. Well, this idea of first responders and combat athletes are starting to blend to one another. I wanted to get your perception or your what you believe a combat athlete is. Like, how would you define a combat athlete?
Yeah. So, when I think of combat athlete, what I'm thinking of is kind of anybody that's really kind of in, whether it's boxing, judo, jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts, karate, anybody that's in kind of either a striking or grappling sport. So when I say combat athlete, typically that's kind of what I'm defining as combat athlete. And so a lot of, and there's also combatives, which is, training, that type of training in the military or in tactical athletes like police officers. So for me, that combat athletes, it's a very broad term. The majority that I deal with are mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu. Those are the two main sports that I work with. And it's really about, I've been training for 9.5 years. As a physical therapist, I absolutely love the sport. If you like human anatomy and you like biomechanics, this sport is like, there's no other, so I've really enjoyed that aspect of it. At the same time, I see so many, as a physical therapist, if you have, number one, jiu-jitsu is the fastest growing sport in the US right now. So as a physical therapist, if you have your own practice, it is an orthopedic referral warehouse for you. Because what most people don't know is that typically you have, so the belt rankings are white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt. Typically will take you 12 years to get a black belt. Brown belt, I've been doing it 9.5 years. I got my brown belt about 6 months ago. That being said, what happens is it takes a year or two to get a blue belt. And about 75 to 80% of people quit once they get a blue belt. And the main reason that they quit is because of injury. And so what ends up happening is that gyms they don't get a lot of upper belts, which upper belts is really kind of what makes a gym, because you're getting more advanced people, you're getting more advanced training. You don't have these, what we call spazzy white belts, always injuring you. You actually have people that are more controlled and they're not going to, jerk on you and things like that. But the other thing is it's more expensive for a gym to recruit new members than maintain members. So, when I first got into this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a great referral source. And so at the gym I was at, even as a white belt, I started to, at my gym, kind of be the PT for our gym. And what I found is by doing very simple stuff, screening injuries early on, giving people just easy recommendations. What I found is that we were having a significantly less injury rate that caused people to get off the mats. Because what the studies show, and there are some studies in this in jiu-jitsu, is that if you're off the mat more than 3 months, you're 60% more likely not to return. So, the more time you have off the mat, just like workers' comp, right? We know from workers' comp, if you're off work for X period of time, you're X percentage more likely never to return to that job. Same thing with jujitsu, especially because you're paying for it, right? Because you're paying to be there. So for physical therapists or athletic trainers, this is a great opportunity to kind of partner with a gym, do screenings and things like that. And that's really kind of how I started. I went from that to what I started to see as I got more advanced in my belt was that people that were being treated, so they've had an injury, they were going to a physical therapist, they were being treated by people who had no clue what the sport was. So if you go into a physical therapist as a jiu-jitsu athlete and they ask you what you do and you say jiu-jitsu, and it's like, oh, is that like Krav Maga? You lost me. Like, is that karate? No. Okay, so now I'm going somewhere else because you have no idea what I do. It's, because it's so much joint manipulation. It's, so what part of what I tried to do is then move to creating content for physical therapists about the sport, like common submissions, common joints that are manipulated with those submissions. What does an average orthopedic exam look like in a jiu-jitsu athlete? Because, like if you ever watch me turn my head, I don't have full cervical range of motion because I've been choked too many times for 9.5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, your fingers, I don't know if you can see my fingers, even the knuckles on your fingers change over time. So these are all things that happen with jiu-jitsu athletes that, if you're not familiar with the sport, you're not thinking of, and you're thinking you're going to change that neck range of motion, probably not. You know what I mean?
So what are some things that you consider or tell people to look for when dealing with combat athletes? Say you're a physical therapist, you have a Brazilian jiu-jitsu athlete coming in and you're not naive to the fact that you don't have experience with it, but at least like what are some things that maybe you should look for in that first visit?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I ask them right away is, number one, what is your sport? Is it karate? Is it jujitsu? Is it judo? Is it wrestling? If it's a jujitsu athlete, I always ask them, what's your belt rank? Because that tells me kind of where they're at in the process of training and learning. It also tells me so like as a brown belt, it opens you up to new submissions. So as a purple belt, I can now do wrist locks, which is, a lot of wrist injuries come from that. As a brown belt, now you're open to ankle locks and knee bars, which are definitely much more brutal types of submissions. But that doesn't happen at a white belt, right? So number one, so I try to find out what kind of belt you are, what's your rank. The other thing I try to find out is what kind of player are you? Are you a guard puller? Because it's an extremely different game. Or are you a top pressure kind of guy? Those two people are going to have completely different games. For a guard puller, if they're doing things that are like called spider guard, where you basically hold on to the person's sleeves and you put your feet in their elbows, so you prop their elbows out and you're constantly pulling, those people tend to have a lot of biceps tendonitis. They tend to have a lot of rotator cuff issues and things like that. Where your top players are going to have completely different set of injuries. So I try to find out, what is your, where are you at in the spectrum of training? What kind of player you are, and then also what kinds of things you're having problems with. And I think as a physical therapist, it's good to have some just common knowledge on what some of those things are. Well, I have a problem when I do delahiva, or I have a problem when I do spider guard. These are all terms that are very fluent in the sport. But as a physical therapist, it's like somebody saying, I'm a quarterback or a running back, right?
Right.
Like, we know what those are. But there's not a lot of knowledge out there when it comes to this particular sport, if that makes sense.
For sure. Is there like a hierarchy of like starting positions of when, like, in regards, I know you mentioned like there's a belt system, and as you're
Mhm.
going through the belt system, you're doing various, different techniques and heel lock or ankle locks,
Yeah.
and, so on. Is there like a hierarchy for like starting positions of like getting people back into the sport?
So getting back into the sport, typically what I do is I have them start with like drills. So some of our common drills, like, break falls, forward rolls, backward rolls, shrimping, bridging, those kinds of things. And then what I'll do is I will have them go to some just drills. Okay. So you're going to do some drills from guard, drills from side control, so it's very controlled chaos. I actually have a sheet that has the levels of chaos and how you're controlling that chaos through the rehab process. So you have more of your kind of your drills. And then what I do is I go to what is called flow rolling. And, flow rolling is a concept that white belts don't understand because they come at you at 150% all the time.
Sure.
So what I always tell everybody is that, if you're going back to the mats, find a purple belt or a brown belt that you can flow roll with, because they're going to understand. Some blue belts understand it, but mostly purple belts and brown belts and black belts. And that's really just kind of going through the positions. And the reason that is you start flow rolling it, 25 to 50%, then you go up to 60 to 70%, and then you can kind of move your way up percentage wise from there. Typically takedowns are the last piece of the pie that I put into place, because those are some of the, it depends on, if you've got a gym that's a strong wrestling gym, so it's going to be a lot of single legs, double leg takedowns. If you got a judo, it's going to be a lot of hip throws and things like that. It's going to be more pounding on your body. Our gym is kind of a combo of judo and wrestling, so we have a lot of ankle picks and things like that. So that's it's harder to control that kind of stuff. So that would be more kind of in phase of return to sport for me.
Now, when you're thinking about combat athletes in sports, you started kind of alluding to some of the areas that are most commonly injured, but what would you say some of the most common areas that are injured? You mentioned the neck and the wrists and stuff.
Yeah.
Are those common, the two areas that you see the most?
No, I'd say, well, neck, definitely, because there's probably, I don't know, 100 some odd different chokes you can do. I think in a session, like a training session, like we typically have live rolling for 30 minutes. We do 5-minute bouts, and in 5 minutes, I'll probably pull off like 3 or 4 different chokes. The next thing I would say is knee and shoulder. Knee probably more common, because there is a lot of, if you take my leg, like you go in for a single leg and you pull up on my leg, a lot of times I'm bouncing around on one leg while you're trying to get me down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes on that bouncing leg, you can, tear your ACL or strain your meniscus. A lot of times with the passes that we do, like a knee slide pass, sometimes you can tear a meniscus with that. So there's a lot of knee injuries that occur. I would say big percentage of people that I see are knee, and then shoulder. There's a lot of different shoulder injuries that it can occur. But again, it also depends on, what end of the spectrum you're at, what's your school.
Mm-hmm.
We've got one guy at our school who's a phenomenal black belt. He was one of the first white belts in America that then ended up going into a black belt. And he's an ankle lock specialist. So, people that come from his classes, they're I think probably the first 6 or 9 months, I tore my ATF, ruptured my ATF on myself. So there's a choke that we do called a triangle choke. And again, I was a white belt. And I threw up the triangle choke, got it. I was super excited. I had it. And instead of grabbing my shin, I grabbed my foot and I yanked on my foot and popped off my ATF.
Oh God.
Yeah. Yeah. It was brutal. So, I mean, it's, that stuff happens. So, ankle injuries are common, but I would say if I had to go most common, I'd say probably neck, knee, and shoulder. Probably in that order.
Well, one of the things that I see a lot in sports, and obviously, for someone who's listening who's completely lost in regards to just like the whole lexicon of Brazilian
Yeah.
Jiu-Jitsu, it's really important for you to maybe look up some of these words and to
Mhm.
understand the sport and understand your athlete more. But getting back into the idea of like return to sport, or at least just like preventing injuries in general, because
Yeah.
that's what you can want to do. Is there an ability to even prevent injuries in
Yes.
combat sports? Is it mostly just come from foundations with good technique, or does it come from the ability to make sure that you are covering all the factors of like
Yep.
recovery? Like how does
Yep.
that work, and like is
Yep.
it even possible?
Yep. Yeah. So, obviously don't get caught in submissions. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't get choked out.
I'm
Yeah.
just kidding. No, there is quite a bit. So one of the common injuries that I see, especially like in our white belts, is growing strains. And the growing strains come from simply holding guard. So I'm laying on the ground. I've got my legs wrapped around you, right? And you're on your knees and you're trying to get up. It's a common UFC position, right? So you see the guy with the legs around. So what's happening is you're trying to get up, is you're pushing my leg down, and I have to eccentrically resist that.
Mm.
So it leads to a lot of adductor strains. So one of the things that I always tell for our white belts is you need to do high repetitions of abduction and abduction. Now, very rarely would I have ever said, the seated adduction and abduction machine is good, but because we are in that position in jiu-jitsu, it's actually really good.
Mm.
And so what I'll do is I'll have people do not just adduction, but I'll have them do it eccentrically, very high reps. But I also have them do abduction, because one of the things that happens is if I've got you what's called half guard, I've got my knee across your chest, and typically you're trying to push my knee down. And so I have to eccentrically resist that. So a lot of times that can add to hip pain. So, things like that, super easy to train. Training it appropriately through eccentric training, high reps, can help to prevent that injury. For shoulder injuries, a lot of the times that, somebody gets you in Americana position or a key lock position or something like that, or Kimura position, I am eccentrically resisting you through my rotator cuff. And so again, I do high reps, rotator cuff. I work on shoulder range of motion. We talked about, I actually talk about in my course, oh gosh, and I'm pulling a total blank on total shoulder range of motion. So I look at total shoulder range of motion. I find the same concept applies to baseball players as it applies to jiu-jitsu athletes, that if you've got a significantly altered total shoulder range of motion, right side to left side, you're going to be more susceptible to an injury. So we got to correct that. I do a lot of eccentric bicep contractions, because a lot of the times if I have you in guard, I'm pulling you into me so I can get to your neck, and you're pulling me away, right? So I have to resist you eccentrically there. But also if you get me into an arm bar, I have to eccentrically resist you pulling me into an arm bar. So even though it's a joint orthopedic joint manipulation sport, that it basically, what I tell PTs is it's every provocative test you've ever learned taken to the extreme to pop. So the idea is strengthen all those positions so you can resist it. And what I find is that you can do that. So one of the things that we've developed is actually a BFR training routine where we will work on the endurance component. So I'll put like BFR cuffs on people's arms and I'll have them do what we call grip fighting, something that we do where I'll come in and I'll grab your gi and you got to break my grip off, and then I got to break your grip off. And it's a technique that we'll do for a set period of time. Then I'll have them go to some sprawls. So you'll shoot in on me for a double or a single leg takedown, and I'll sprawl on you. and then we reverse that back and forth. So what I'll typically do is I'll have them do that with BFR to really build up that endurance component, take your BFR off, and then just go through some drills. So now you're tired, you're fatigued. And what ends up happening is that when you're tired and fatigued in jiu-jitsu is your technique goes to crap. So what I do is I fatigue them out and then I have them work on their technique and really focusing on the technique, getting the technique down correctly. Don't just be sloppy. Don't let your hips sit on the ground. Don't, one of the things that we do when I've got you in guard, my head's not on the ground, my head's up. So you have to hold their head up. So that's not something else, one of the things I use is iron neck. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a device that sits on your head and it's got a spindle that spins all the way around it. I use that a lot because again, it helps to train 360 degrees. The other thing is too, is that if I've got it pulling from behind and I have somebody going in and doing like shot drills versus a wrestler can come in with their head down to do a shot. But if you do that as a jiu-jitsu guy, you're going to get choked. So what it does, the iron neck actually teaches you to keep your head up. So I come in with my head up when I get you for a single leg. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do for prevention, even though it's a combat sport that is going to put all of your joints at manipulation.
So as a key component to basically train to failure and making sure that you sustain good form within that and range or within that fatigue. I know with ACL care, it's really important to bring the athlete to fatigue and make sure that they still have good mechanics. And so I'm assuming that an important component of that is also is the same, right?
Absolutely. So, for our ACL stuff, we've been looking at that for quite some time. We call it fatigue state training. And I take those same concepts over to jiu-jitsu. It's really working on that fatigue state training. Just like I do with my ACLs, we actually had a program called ACL Play It Safe that had an athlete do all of their exercise or had them do their practice, and they would use practice to create fatigue. And then we would have them in a fatigue state solely work on movement related exercise. So where they really have to concentrate on controlling that frontal plane motion, controlling that dynamic valgus, working on their core stability, all that stuff in a tired state. It's a very similar concept to what I do in jiu-jitsu.
Now, how important is the warm-up process when it comes to Brazilian jiu-jitsu? I know for some guys, just lifting, they walk in the gym, they start lifting immediately. And I'm assuming it could be the same for combat athletes. So how important is warming up?
Yeah. So it's very important, obviously, and two, as a mature athlete, an older athlete, it's especially important for me. I would say that what ends up happening is that as you go along the belt ranks, you realize how important that is for you. Right. There's a common joke that purple belts always skip warm-ups. And I would say that by the time you get to that belt rank, more than ever, it's even more important. So, to me, typically most gyms today, and I'll tell you, I've probably trained at 50 different gyms around the US. Very rarely have I gone into a place where they don't do a warm-up. Whether that's a warm-up doing specific drills like, bridges and hip escapes and forward rolls and backward rolls. There's also, sometimes you'll use drills. Okay, we're going to work on butterfly sweeps. So this is going to be our warm-up, because that is a very dynamic type of activity. So warm-ups to me are really important.
When you have a combat athlete, one thing that they have a problem with is, adjusting how much they're doing. So with dealing with that, how do you control how much to do when they want to go back to their sport? I'm assuming when you say, okay, you can go, it's like immediately going back into that. And like, how do you have that conversation when it's like, okay, we got to go slow, we got to move, or like you were describing earlier, you have to maybe start with a higher belt and do flow rolling. For someone who's not familiar with jiu-jitsu or any combat sport, how do you tell that athlete to be like, okay, you got to go in, but you can't go 100% yet?
Volume is, and the research shows volume is a big issue with jiu-jitsu. The more you train, the more likely you are to get injured. I try to tell people, like, when you're starting out, you should at least, not do more than 2 days a week. You need to let your body adjust to it at least 2 days a week, because a lot of people will get into it and they'll start out at 3 days a week. For me, I train 5 days. I weight train 5 days a week, and I do jujitsu 5 days a week. But I've also been doing this for 9.5 years. I did not start doing that. I started it 2 days a week, because your shoulders get sore, your neck gets sore, your knee gets sore. You have to have sufficient. This is extremely intense. As an upper belt, we sometimes do 10-minute rounds. And I have Tuesday, Thursday where I roll with one of our black belts. We set a timer for 30 minutes and we go the whole time.
Oh my God.
We don't rest, and so you got to give your body sufficient recovery time. The biggest mistake I see people do when they get in the sport is they jump right into it. They try to go 5 days a week, or they go 3 days a week, and they end up getting injured, a month or 6 weeks into it. The other problem with the sport is it's highly addictive. For someone who is a type A personality, it is extreme. I always forewarn people, like, if this is your personality, you're going to get addicted to the sport, because it's a very addictive sport.
And then do you recommend doing weight training alongside with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Absolutely.
All endurance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's funny because historically the sport would tell you don't do weightlifting. Matter of fact, my professor, I think when I first started, told me I was going to have to, stop weightlifting. And have I changed my weightlifting? Absolutely. I don't do near as heavy weightlifting as I used to do, just because my body can't take it. And two is I want to have better endurance now than just, I used to do 8 to 10 reps. Now I'm doing, sets of 15 to 20, because I want to be able to maintain the endurance component of that. I personally think that if you don't weight train and you do just nothing but jujitsu, you're setting yourself up for a problem. Because you've got to cross train, just like any other sport. You got to cross train, and the weight training becomes a part of your injury prevention.
For sure. Well, and also, what about cardio? I mean, you mentioned that you're going for 30-minute rounds, which is crazy, but like, how do you fit in cardio as well to build up your tank? Do you think doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu enough to work your like cardiovascular health, or you need to do like how does that work and how do you fit it in?
Yeah. It depends on the person, depends on the level you're at. Cardio, if you do additional cardio, is going to do nothing but help you, because the sport is, the thing you have to realize is you're not just doing like a bike, or you're not just doing an elliptical. You're basically contracting every muscle in your body for a set period of time, 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however long you're doing it, right? And it is extremely fatiguing. So the ability to up your cardio. So one of the things that I do is I typically, I add BFR, and I've got a cardio protocol I do. 5 minutes pressure on for 5 minutes, pressure off for 5 minutes, pressure on for 5 minutes, pressure off for 5 minutes. Doing that at 40%, 40 to 50% VO2 max, or ratings of perceived exertion. Studies show that improves your VO2 max significantly more than doing maximal sprinting. So that being said, what I'll do is I'll do bouts like that for 30 minutes, because I'll use that 5 minutes pressure on is kind of my aggressive round. I'll use the 5 minutes pressure off as my recovery, and then 5 pressure on my 5-minute aggressive round. So I use it like that. So, again, thinking through how you approach your cardio. But I will tell you, everybody that I see who adds cardio to their routine, people are always, so I'm 53 years old, and I roll with guys that are in their 20s and 30s. They're always, I think, a little surprised, one, that I can keep going around them. And two is that, if they stand up and I've got my legs wrapped up around them, that I can actually pop up and grab a hold of your shoulders, so, core training, cardiovascular training. I mean, it's all the key part of it.
And there's so many different components. And so if you are a therapist,
absolutely,
interviewing somebody who is an athlete, these are all really important
Yeah.
components to consider, right? Like if you have an athlete coming in, chances are they're probably weightlifting. They're also,
Yeah.
doing some form of cardio. It's not just this fighting thing. It's all the factors that are going in together. And as you alluded to, volume, right? How much
Yeah.
you're doing. And that needs to be a part of the equation in returning your athlete going back to sport.
Well, and that's part of the reason that we started Combat Athlete Science Institute is, to help athletes understand that you can do stuff for injury prevention.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a whole recovery, we've partnered with Hyperice to provide to the jiu-jitsu community, not just equipment, but protocols on how do you use this equipment during competition. I'll give you an example. You go to an IBJJF, International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation competition, as a brown belt, be competing at 10 minutes. I may have 5 fights that day. And so I have a fight, I maybe have 30 minutes to recover for my next one. So getting into a Normatec system, doing some percussion gun in between rounds, kind of helping for that active recovery. Boom, going back into that next round, I'm going to be a lot more recovered than if I just sat there and walked around the gymnasium for 30 minutes.
Right. So even a recovery just in a short bout of time is crucial and really
Absolutely.
important. Athletes overall or for providers who are trying to improve their lexicon, or even maybe they want to get involved with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I guess, what is the best way to go about it? Is it finding a local gym? Are all gyms the same? I guess, how do you get about it? How do you go about trying to get involved with it?
I would look for local gyms around you. And then I would reach out to the professors, whether it's, a lot of them are on Instagram. Whether you reach out to them by email or by Instagram, just letting them know, it's always, they are much more likely to work with you if you come in and do some classes with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of gyms offer free classes. Go in and take a class. I will tell you, I'm just going to forewarn you, it's intimidating as hell. You're going to get that butterflies in your stomach, like you're going to a fight after school.
Sure.
But that being said, you're going to learn so much in just a couple of sessions. And, it allows you to make a relationship with the school. And, there's a lot of PTs I've seen that are out there that are white belts and blue belts that are moving in that direction to kind of get themselves known as the grappling PT. And it is much needed. It is the fastest growing sport. From what I see, 90% of our athletes do not get the PT that they need. They're ill prepared to return to the mat. And there's just from a PT business perspective, there's a great opportunity to create that niche practice.
Absolutely. And, not only that, you're going to build a great community of guys or gals, and really understand a brand new sport that is really just taking over and only getting bigger, right? Like it's only going to get more and more popular. And I can definitely tell from just seeing patients in my own clinic, but also just seeing other providers like what you're doing, it's just going to be becoming bigger and bigger. And people are going to want to ask more and more questions about how to help rehab people and get back to where they want to be.
Absolutely.
Now, do you believe, overall in your career, since you started working with combat athletes and, you've worked with first responders, what is probably one of the biggest things that surprised you the most, having worked with these athletes, and maybe something that you didn't expect to learn along the way?
Jiu-jitsu athletes that there is so little PT knowledge around the sport. And that sadly, when they go to get PT, that there's little investigation into the demands of the sport. For first responders, it's probably how appreciative they are that somebody is actually investing into them and their health, and applying the things that we do in sports to what they do as a first responder. I mean, it's been a very humbling, quite honestly, humbling experience for me, working with first responders, and just, I love it because they're so appreciative. I can't tell you how many times people shook my hand and said, thank you. I don't get that when I go to a pro team or a college team, but when you apply that to them, and they're just so appreciative for it. So.
Yeah, I believe it. And it's got to be rewarding for you as a physical therapist. And I'm
It
sure
is,
you're just learning new
absolutely.
things all the time, right? Because this is all new territory, right? You're kind of on open field at this point.
That's the other thing too, is I will say, from a combat athlete standpoint, I'm constantly learning new stuff. I was telling somebody earlier today, because I came up, I tried out some new chokes on him, and they were pretty successful. And he was asking me, he's like, "Where'd you get that at?" And I said, what I did is I took my biomechanics book and I started looking at the biomechanics of it a little bit more. And it's, as a physical therapist, what I'm able to do is take my anatomy and biomechanical understanding and apply that to the sport. And it's just been awesome. It's a lot of fun. There's so much opportunity, I think, there for physical therapists.
Well, it's kind of like you're a scientist. You're just playing around with it and figuring like, how can I get this guy, how
Absolutely.
can I put myself in the best position, but also, get my opponent to choke out or submit or whatever
Yep.
you want to do. Right.
My next project is to write a book on the biomechanics of jiu-jitsu submissions, to
That'll
get
be,
into the anatomy and like how you're stressing the ATF when you do a certain ankle lock or something like that. Yeah,
yeah,
that would be fascinating to me.
that would be great. And
Interesting for me.
it'd be helpful for a lot of
Yeah,
clinicians
right.
for sure. Well, you've written a book before and I think it's back
Sure.
there on that wall right there. Yeah.
It is.
How to build a badass firefighter.
Yeah, I
What
actually
was
got
that
it.
like? And like, where can people find that if they're interested?
There it
There it
is.
is.
So it's they can find it on Amazon. It's basically, it goes into all the science behind the athletic movement index, why we developed it, why I developed it. It goes into the science behind each one of the movements of the athletic movement index. How do you interpret movement related to each one of the movements, and then how that drives training in a methodology behind the training. And the last part I actually did, last couple of chapters, is actually, as a physical therapist or as a practice owner, how do you make this a part of your niche practice? How do you market it? How do you bill for it? How do you talk to doctors about it? How do you talk to patients about it? How do you talk to the community about it? And how do you use that to build a practice?
Well, I'm sure you could take a lot of those concepts and apply it to Brazilian
Yeah,
jiu-jitsu or in combat
absolutely.
athletes or any kind of population you
Absolutely.
want to work with, right?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, my goal is to take the same knowledge and apply it to building the badass fighter.
Nice. Yeah.
That'll be
Well,
my next one.
I'm going to be looking out for those books, and I'm
Yeah.
sure many others are going to be looking out for your content as well.
Awesome.
Trent, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. This has been obviously great. You've been a great mentor, as well as, someone who I look up to in regards to just continue to provide great content as a PT. So I want to thank you for all of that and coming on
Thanks,
again
Mike.
today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. We're going to finish off the podcast like with everybody else. You've already asked these questions before, but I'm interested to see if you changed your answers.
Yeah.
First question: if you had the attention of everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say?
Live life to the fullest. Don't get hung up on the negative things. Focus on the positive things. And if you want to do something, you got to believe in your head that you can do it, and then you can do it.
Couldn't agree more. Second question: what book do you recommend, whether you're reading now or in the past?
I think the last time I said Palestine, this time I'm going to say the Bible, because I think we need to get back to more truly, some of the basic concepts of human life and respecting each other, etc.
There you go. If you haven't read the Bible, go get yourself a copy.
Yeah.
Last question: where can people learn more from you and find out information from you? We already mentioned the book. Where can people find you on social media?
BJJPT _ ACL guy. I do put a lot of content out there. I try to, once a month I do journal reviews. So I try to put articles out there related to movement, ACL, BFR, or combat athletes. So I try to do a lot of that. And then they can always go to our website. It's combatathletescienceinstitute.com. I know it's a little long. combatathletescienceinstitute.com. And they can find out more about our combat athlete piece. If you're looking for more on just Rebound, go to justrebound.com and you can see all the services that we do. We do cover about 250 departments across the U.S. And it's a great institution to work for.
And of course, all the links are going to be in the bio. So if you have any interest, all the links will be there. Trent, thanks again so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you very much for having me.